لکه کوم وخت باندې چې زلزله وشوله بیا په دغه وخت باندې موږ په کرینه کې وي ښه شپې 2 بجې وې چې زلزله باندې وشوه بیا موږ وتښتلې کرونه بیا په دغه کر کې یو شهید وشو و د همدغه کرینه کې ډېر شهیدونه وشول بیا د شهیدونو موږ یو لار په منده ته کې وښخ کړل ښه.
A quick update from Tonga following the eruption of Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai volcano. Our humanitarian colleagues report that about 84,000 people, that's more than 80% of the population, have been impacted by the disaster.
Eto ereda se jod dile da se fani banude মনে করো জোর দিলে ফানি বানুইলে আছে বহুত মানুষ আছে যারা নিচত ঘর আছে তারা আছে ফানি উঠে দুঃখ পাওয়া কষ্ট পাওয়া কষ্ট আর গুড়া হুয়াইন যারা আছে বাস্ট মা গুড়া হুয়াইনও আছে বহুত কিছু ফানিত ফুরি যার কইতে আছে.
Personally, pag may disaster, no, hirap na run to ask for help. Paggalaw-galaw ko, kung ano yung kukunin ko ng mga bagay, kung I'm not prepared.
Half of humanity is in the danger zone from floods, droughts, extreme storms, and wildfires. We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It is in our hands.
Asia Pacific is the most disaster-prone region in the world. But hazards don't have to devastate. Risk comes down to the decisions we make. We can choose to push short-term profit first. We can choose to rebuild over and over and push the problem to future generations. We can choose to ignore the plight of those most at risk. Or we can decide to move from crisis to resilience. We can choose to invest in resilience and preparedness. We can shock-proof infrastructure and systems. We can bring the most vulnerable around the table so we don't make decisions about them without them. We can learn from indigenous and traditional knowledges. We can empower local actors to build resilience in their communities. Together, now, we can choose to stop the spiral of disasters. Welcome to the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction.
Good morning and welcome to Brisbane, Queensland, Australia for the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Please welcome our facilitator, Professor Stan Grant.
Hello, welcome to you all. Welcome to delegates from across the Asia Pacific to the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, whether you're joining us here in person or virtually, we're delighted to have you here to participate in this important event, to listen to these critical conversations and to bring your experience and your wisdom to what is going to be a very revealing and challenging and hopeful couple of days of discussion. I'd like to begin today by welcoming to the stage Ashley Ruska and the Nunakal Yagara Aboriginal dancers who are going to bring you a welcome to country. Ashley.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joseph Buman. Alongside me, my cousin Aaron Ruska. And we are descendants of the Yagara people of this area through our grandfather, Eddie Ruska, who was a well-known elder from the area. If you didn't know, the Yagara tribe is the local tribe that occupies the Brisbane area, stretching from the mouth of the Brisbane River, south to the Logan River and out to the Great Dividing Range to the foothills of Warwick and Toowoomba, and as far north as the Caboolture River. Along with the welcome to country is also the smoking ceremony. And the smoking ceremony is another way of welcoming people into an area. And the smoke is a cleansing, bringing in all the good spirit, taking out all the bad spirit. Along with the welcome to country and the smoking ceremony is also the passing over the messy stick. And this messy stick is one which we call Yalwa Buna. And this Yalwa Buna was used similar to a passport back then. And would use this passport to go into another tribal group's area. For example, if we were to cross that Logan River in the south, it'd be governed by a whole nother tribal group again, which would be the Yugambeh tribe. If the Yugambeh tribe wanted to come into an area, they would have to use this Yalwa Buna to get into an area. If they didn't have this Yalwa Buna on them, there's a fair possibility that they could be speared dead on the spot. There are three main tribes that occupy the area, the Yagara, Jagara, and Turrbal tribes. Just on behalf of those three tribes, I'd like to say, Yura Yura Nambali, Yanara Ganariba Jara, Nanya Birili, Nanya Bayami Jara. Means you all welcome here today, and may God and our ancestors guide us here in peace. And we would like to extend a warm welcome here by welcoming you with a welcoming song of this we call Malacha, which is a welcoming song of this to welcome you. Also to welcome the good Nora, good ancestor, good spirit. Now bow it down, Marepa Puna. Now bow it down. Now bow it down, yeah. Oh, makan ba, now bow one jana, Maripa Puna. Now bow it down, yeah. Oh, makan ba, now bow one jana, Maripa Puna. Now bow it down, yeah. Oh, makan ba, now bow one jana, Maripa Puna. Yo, nanti yang kena noro. Yo, nanti nak beli yang kena malaja. Yo, woi. Danre kuna malaja kuna danre na miljana malarai nongara danre kuna malaja kuna danre chai up. Danre kuna malaja kuna danre na miljana malarai nongara danre kuna malaja kuna danre chai up. Danre kuna malaja kuna danre na miljana malarai nongara yo. Welcome. Many years ago, this land was what we once called Birano, the flat treeless plain. There were no creeks, no rivers, no mountains. Then Bayami God, he came down from the heavens of Birili, and Birili, he was someone similar to Jesus. They created two brothers. One was the dolphin brother, which we call Gowanda. The other brother was the Gowenna brother, which we call Yowakara. You see that? A big disagreement. So the Gowenna brother, he declared war. The Gowenna brother, he ran up all the land animals. The dolphin brother, he ran up all the sea animals. And this war went on for many weeks into months, until the bird life joined in, led by Mibin, the eagle. Mibin, he brought the ancient spear up from the south. The Gowenna brother, he looked up and he saw the spear, so he grabbed the spear and he speared his dolphin brother into the back. The dolphin, he went down. He sees blood was boiling. He began to burn through the land, creating all the dry gullies. This is the dance of Mibin, the wedge-tailed eagle. Ami banana yudi, ayu den lengana. Mi banana yudi, ayu den lengana. Mi banana yudi, ayu den lengana. Mi banana yudi, ayu den lengana. Chai. Mi banana yudi, ayu den lengana. 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 Chai. Me banana your day, are you dead? 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 Chai. We now dance about the curlew bird, which we call gharial. You see, we believe if one of these birds calls out, we believe it is a warning to our people. If a group of these birds call out in a sorrowful cry, we believe that someone close to us is about to pass. This is gharial, the curlew. That brings us to our last song of this week called Jagana, which means pay and respect to Mother Earth. For we as Aboriginal people believe that we don't own the land owns us. We're just here to look after and maintain it as best we can. This is Jagana, Mother Earth. Would like to say Nanya Nabali. You've been a wonderful audience and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and welcome everyone.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic welcome and what a privilege to be here and to see that and to be welcomed to this country from wherever you have come to be part of this and to join in the thousands of years of wisdom and learning that has taken place on this land. As a Wiradjuri, Gamaroi and Dharawal person, I would also like to pay my respects to the Turrbal, Jagera and Yagara people and thank you again for that wonderful, stirring welcome to country. Well, this conference is the 9th Regional Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Australia is co-hosting this significant event alongside the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Over 3,000 delegates from across the region will be joining us both here in Brisbane and also virtually. The theme for this year's conference is From Crisis to Resilience, Transforming the Asia-Pacific region's Future Through Disaster Risk Reduction. The conference program will focus on 3 pillars. Now, they are investing in financial resilience and preparedness, shock-proofed infrastructure and systems, and resilient communities. Across the conference, we will particularly focus on the cross-cutting issues of inclusion, localisation of DRR actions, and First Nations people's knowledge and practice. Crucially, this is the first time that the Pacific leaders have been invited as full Pacific participants to this regional conference. It's important that Pacific voices are an active part of this conversation. As we know, we have so much to learn from our Pacific families' disaster preparation and management experience, and we want to share our own knowledge and ideas from disasters that we have faced here in Australia. This conference also comes at a critical time for the Asia-Pacific region, a region that, as you know, is the most disaster-prone part of the world. This is a last opportunity for regional leaders to meet in advance of the mid-term review of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, scheduled to take place in May next year, 2023. Our region is also faced with compounding and cascading risks testing us like never before. The impacts of climate change, for example, magnifying a range of challenges in disaster risk management. Our seas are rising, our oceans are warming, they are becoming more acidic. Our ice caps are melting and our ecosystems are under stress. As a result, disasters are increasing in frequency and severity. The resilience of communities across the region is being incrementally eroded, and human development indicators in some countries are now in reverse. As a correspondent for more than 40 years, many of those years outside of Australia, I've reported this unfolding disaster, covering natural disaster, earthquake, flood, the impact of bushfires around our world. And sadly, we're seeing this playing out right now in so many parts of our world. And the one thing that I was always struck by was the extraordinary ability of people to endure and that remarkable resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming disaster. There is good news, and that it is within our capabilities to do something about these negative trends. This conference is not solely about the challenges we collectively face. It is also about sharing successes. Importantly, this is an opportunity to consider ways that we can work together to reduce risk, save lives, minimise economic loss, and ensure, crucially, that no one is left behind. It is for these reasons that you are here and have been invited to participate fully in all that this conference has to offer. Now, the details can be found in the conference app on all sessions and activities. That will include an ability to plan your own conference timetable. Now, the conference will include plenary sessions, working sessions, spotlight events, partner events and learning labs. There is also a marketplace, host stand and Pacific Pavilion. Apart from the core sessions of the conference, I'd also like to draw your attention to partner events, these hosted by participating organisations to further investigate the conference theme. The Ignite stage, where delegates will have the opportunity to listen to a diverse range of speakers. The Learning Labs, where delegates will actively share good practices and learn from each other. The Pacific Pavilion will feature a collaborative learning and engagement space that will showcase the scientific and technical innovations that have been created to reduce disaster risk in the Pacific. And finally, our marketplace will form the heart of the conference. It will be where you can meet, connect, and collaborate with each other, and I'm sure most importantly, eat. With up to 60 exhibitors, multiple meeting hubs, the Ignite stage and the host stand will be a hive of activity during the conference. Now, I want to talk to you about the beautiful artwork that you're going to see across the conference. It's titled Caring. A very talented local Indigenous artist, Safina Stewart, has produced this work. It emphasises the importance of caring for one another, the importance of caring for one another, and the importance of caring for country. During the conference, please take time to visit Safina in the marketplace to hear her story and the story of her work. So, I would like to now welcome our first speaker of the morning, Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier of Queensland, whose capital has turned on a typically beautiful Brisbane day to welcome us to this beautiful city. Welcome, Premier.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Can I, of course, thank the UN for putting this conference on today and thank Mami Mizatori. Can I acknowledge Minister Murray Watt as well and Minister Mark Ferner. Excellencies, distinguished guests, our welcome visitors from interstate and Asia Pacific neighbourhood. Can I also take this public opportunity on behalf of our state following the funeral last night of our late Queen Elizabeth to reiterate our gratitude for her service and to wish His Majesty King Charles a long and happy reign. And can I acknowledge our traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Well, good morning everyone and welcome to Queensland. We love our state and we love welcoming visitors. Of course, the reason you're here is that even though we live in a wonderful part of the world, sometimes we deal with nature's harsher side, and you do too. And though I say sometimes, now it's more often, all of us are now living with the reality of climate change. More storms, more floods, more fires, more extreme in more places. Since 2011, Queensland has faced almost 100 natural disasters, on average almost one a month for over a decade. No region of our big state has gone unscathed, and the climate experts have been shocked at some of our recent events, such as bushfires in the tropical north. Nevertheless, from everyone, we've learned to improve our disaster recovery and resilience. So let's also learn from one another. Queensland can learn from your knowledge, and I hope you also take something from our state's work. What we all want to do is reduce the human and economic impacts of natural disasters, to turn crisis into resilience, because disasters destroy bridges, buildings and businesses, and even worse, they take lives and ruin lives. Sometimes the emotional toll cannot be measured. And I'm very conscious that for many of our friends in the Asia Pacific region, the loss of life and property from disasters in recent history has been overwhelming at times. In the time I've been Premier from 2015, there have been 65 natural disasters in our state. Storms, cyclones, floods, hailstorms and bushfires. I've had the moving experience of meeting many Queenslanders picking up the pieces of their lives, if the pieces weren't washed away or destroyed, including severe tropical cyclone Debbie in March-April 2017, the Central Queensland bushfires in November-December 2018, the North Queensland monsoon trough in January-February 2019, the South East Queensland hailstorm in October 2020. Then last summer we had a string of disasters including ex-tropical cyclone Seth, the South East Queensland floods and Southern Queensland flooding in May. The frequency and intensity of those events is due to climate change, such as the unprecedented Central Queensland bushfires in late 2018. They started with an equally unprecedented heatwave that stretched over 1,000 kilometres, with low humidity across the supposedly wet tropics. At Proserpine, the temperature was 40 degrees and the relative humidity was only 18%. Proserpine is more than 400 kilometres north of the Tropic of Capricorn, one of the most humid parts of our state. Near Mackay, bushfire burned through rainforest, believed to be previously unrecorded in scientific journals. A climate expert said it was the terrestrial equivalent of ice sheeting breaking up. And for the first time in Queensland, the Weather Bureau rated the fire danger as catastrophic. But with only a few weeks came the extreme opposite. A monsoonal low flooded tens of thousands of homes in Townsville and killed hundreds of thousands of cattle in northwest Queensland. No one wants disasters like that, but we've learned a lot and fine-tuned our prevention, preparedness, response and recovery. As Premier of Queensland, I chair our Queensland Disaster Management Committee as soon as a serious threat emerges. And I want to talk a little bit about this with you today because I think this is a key to the way in which we deal with the natural disaster and then our recovery. It's a unique decision-making body in Australia. Everyone I need is in that room you see before you. We have our ministers, we have our heads of our government agencies, we have our mayors that dial in from all around Queensland, we have police and emergency services, we have energy and water suppliers, we have the Bureau of Meteorology that gives us updates 3 to 4 times a day. We also have our Queensland Disaster Management Officer who helps convey the messages to our public. We also have the Australian Defence Force that sits in on this meeting, and then I would make regular calls to the Prime Minister. We set our priorities, we carry them out, we get updates on the ground, and then myself, the Police Commissioner, the Emergency Services Minister, the Weather Bureau and the State Disaster Coordinator go out and regularly update the media and the public on what is happening. And it's our direct communication with what is happening at the present time to the public, no matter where they are in our state. And I think that gives the public confidence, but it also gives the public an understanding that our government is working with them to keep them safe in such a volatile period. One period I want to explain to you briefly, share with you, is Cyclone Debbie. A tropical low became a Category 2 cyclone and then a Category 4, hitting populated areas as far as the North Coast on the 28th of March, achieving peak sustained winds of 175 kilometres per hour. In the preparation for this, we were giving regular updates to the community. We evacuated areas where we could, but then when there was no further way of people leaving some of our Whitsunday islands, they were put into a lockdown situation until the cyclone passed. This was a very severe cyclone. The wind and flooding which followed affected the Whitsundays. It then went all the way down to Brisbane, where we are now, into northern New South Wales, and then the tail went into New Zealand the following week. That Disaster Management Committee I spoke to you about, we met 10 times over a 10-day period. We met up in the lead up to the emergency preparations, we met during the cyclone to coordinate decision-making, and afterwards we got people on the ground to help with the recovery. We prepared for up to 25,000 people to be evacuated with shelter and emergency supplies, and we also ensured the connection of power following. We looked at transport and other regional highways that were cut, and it responded to the destruction of Shute Harbour, one of the major port facilities in the region, which you are seeing in front of you. You can see from the before and after photos what has been achieved in rebuilding some of our infrastructure that was damaged. This is Shute Harbour today in 2022, recently opened. We also put in place a new Proserpine Entertainment Centre, and it was wonderful to open this new centre earlier this year. This previous centre had its roof ripped off, and then we were able to reconstruct that. There's also a new centre to house the local Regional Disaster Coordination Centre and a Climate Innovation Hub. All of that is how, in Australia's most disaster-affected state, we've set to be the most resilient. On the policy front, we are addressing climate change with our 50% renewable energy target by 2030 and a commitment to zero net emissions by 2050, with an interim target to reduce emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And I'll have more to say about this next week in my State of the State address. We're also the first state with a permanent recovery and resilience agency called the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. This authority coordinates infrastructure renewal in disaster-affected communities. It was set up under an Act of Parliament, and it ensures that everyone is working together. For example, more than 520 projects have been delivered in 70 local government areas because of this reconstruction agency. Under the Queensland Betterment Fund, disaster recovery investment is to build back better. Of those 520 projects, almost three-quarters have been in natural disasters again, but remarkably, less than 20% of them suffered any new damage. So a $137 million betterment investment has avoided reconstruction costs of nearly $400 million. A good example is the Gayndah-Mundubra Road, a couple of hours north of here. The essential freight and transport link was damaged in 2011 and 2013. Betterment funding was used to relocate a 2-kilometre section 11 metres uphill. The road has stayed functional since then and through 7 disasters. Another key example of building back better is the Horton River Bridge, which had to close for 6 days after the 2019 monsoon trough. Just last month, we opened a brand new bridge, which is, there you see the before and after. Brand new bridge, it is much higher, and there is virtually no possibility of this bridge flooding again because of the amount of work that has gone into making it more resilient. There was also the scenic highway on the Capricorn coast after Cyclone Marcia, and the community of Cardwell after Cyclone Yassi, as you see on the screen. Another new initiative that our government has launched is the $741 million jointly funded Resilient Homes Fund after recent floods. This is in partnership with the Commonwealth Government. It is the largest of its kind in Australia's history. For property owners to raise or retrofit their homes to increase flood resilience, or in severe cases, voluntary buyback. So in those really low-lying areas, we are actually working with the councils, and we will buy back some of those properties and turn those areas into parkland. More than 4,800 people have registered. Another good example is the relocation of Grantham. This happened in 2011 prior to me becoming Premier. Nearly every house in the floodplain was damaged, 130 severely damaged and 29 destroyed. So it was decided that the town would be moved to higher ground. The Reconstruction Authority and the local council developed the plan for rebuilding this community. The new site on the hill had state permission to bypass the normal development proposals. But disaster resilience work can never stop. So as part of this conference, I'm very pleased to be releasing Queensland's new 5-year strategy to strengthen disaster resilience. Our new strategy will include things like community-informed resilience investment, greater interagency coordination, and making resilience business as usual, to move further away from reactive recovery to deliver stronger, safer, and more resilient communities. We must be strategic about what we build. Better resilience changes lives and saves lives. We also have regional resilience strategies working on our regional communities. Our new strategy will also look to the knowledge of our First Nations people. So in conclusion, our government is proud to help lead the way in disaster resilience. I hope I've given you an overview of how we can go about it. But before I finish, I'd just like to share with you a little story about Pam Murphy. In 2019, 40 years of memories were lost when her home was destroyed in the Pigeon Beach fire, one of the fires which climate experts had never seen. I will always remember the day we were able to hand back one of her necklaces. It had been recovered by one of our on-the-ground emergency services staff. It had been cleaned by the local jeweller. More recently, we've read how Pam rebuilt. Her story is like so many others. They are why we're releasing our latest strategy. and they are why you're here today. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I hope I've shared a small little example of how Queensland deals with the challenges that we all face due to climate change, and I'd be more than happy to share with you any further expertise that our agencies have with any of you, so please feel free to reach out to the Queensland Government and to my office. Thank you for coming to Queensland, to Brisbane, an Olympic city and Olympic state for 2032, and enjoy Queensland. Beautiful one day, perfect the next. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. It was just remarkable. You know, you can see these things unfold on television and report these things as I do, but it's not until you hear, as the Premier just said, the numbers that it really strikes you. 100 natural disasters in 10 years, one a month. It's just extraordinary, isn't it? And set against a COVID pandemic that we've all had to deal with at the same time. And how we respond to this as a community, how we get through this, and that wonderful story that you finished with about finding that jewellery. Could everybody just give a big round of applause for all the people who stay up all night, work through all conditions, sacrifice their lives and time with their families to keep us safe during those times. Please give everyone a big round of applause. Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Premier, for that speech. I now have the pleasure of welcoming our next speaker, Ms. Mami Mizzatori. Ms. Mizzatori is the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary-General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Ms. Mizzatori has served for 27 years in foreign capacities in the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we're delighted to have her here with us this morning. Welcome, Ms. Mizzatori.
Your Excellency, Mr. Murray Watt, Your Excellency, Ms. Anastasia Palashuk, Excellencies, distinguished representatives of intergovernmental organizations, international organizations, stakeholders, United Nations agencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today for this conference, the Turrbal, Jagera, and Yugera people, and pay respects to their elders, past and present. Welcome to the 2022 Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. It is my distinct pleasure to formally open this conference. To start, I would like to take a moment to offer my condolences on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II to the people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the wider Commonwealth of Nations. I would also like to offer my condolences and sympathies to the thousands of families here in Australia and across the Asia-Pacific region who have lost loved ones to disasters, including those in Pakistan, who have most recently suffered what the UN Secretary-General has described as climate carnage. It is no secret, as many have already mentioned, that Asia-Pacific is the most disaster-prone region in the world. Along with that comes disaster mortality, injuries, losses of livelihoods, damage to critical infrastructure, disruption of basic public services, and displacements. But this does not have to be this region's legacy. We are here together this week to accelerate the change we need from crisis to resilience by transforming the Asia-Pacific region's future through disaster risk reduction. This concerns all countries in the region, as none have been spared from the impact of disasters. But we need to pay special attention to the needs of the countries that are most vulnerable, namely the least developed countries and the small island developing states. And indeed, we are so proud that this edition of the Ministerial Conference is the first to explicitly include the Pacific Islands in the conference's name. Welcome. And this gathering in this beautiful city of Brisbane would not have been possible without the generous support of the Australian government. So I would like to sincerely thank the government and people of Australia, of the state of Queensland, and the city of Brisbane for its continuous leadership in and support to disaster risk reduction, and for its commitment to hosting this conference despite setbacks and uncertainty. And what a wonderful way to start this conference with those so vivid examples that were portrayed by the Premier on how the Premier herself is leading the disaster risk reduction agenda, from building resilience, responding, building back better, and now with the new strategy, bringing resilience first and foremost so that we can move away slowly from responding to so many disasters. Thank you very much for sharing that experience with us, because that is exactly what the spirit of this whole conference is about, sharing our challenges and best practices. Excellencies, we are now at the midpoint of the lifetime of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The United Nations General Assembly decided to hold a midterm review to take stock of progress and identify priorities and challenge to press forward. The urgency of action is evident as disasters are increasing. I encourage all member states in this region and beyond to carry out your national reviews on how you have been implementing the Sendai Framework, and to turn those findings into necessary measures to step up action, find solutions, accelerate progress to fill the gap, and to reach a resilient future where nobody is threatened by disasters. We know what the drivers of risk are: climate change, environmental degradation, unplanned urban growth, and of course, all the vulnerabilities in our societies, including poverty and inequality. We also know that there are measures which can reduce these vulnerabilities to increase resilience, prevent hazards from becoming disasters that devastate, and trigger humanitarian crisis. Even in the face of growing climate risks, it is possible to achieve and live in a world eventually of zero climate disasters. And because this region is so disaster prone, this is also the region from where many good practices in risk reduction have emerged. Whether around multi-hazard early warning systems, nature-based solutions, or building resilient infrastructure, many communities around the world owe their safety to the Asia-Pacific region. Coming out, finally, from the devastating pandemic, but with the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events increasing, we must seize this moment to scale up our efforts and push for the change we know are needed to stop the spiral of disasters and counter the climate emergency. Excellencies, this conference is organized around 3 thematic pillars, which are 3 areas where we need to focus our efforts so that we can have results in big reductions in the region's vulnerability. The first pillar is investing in the foundations of risk reduction, specifically expanding political capital to structure multi-sectoral, inclusive risk governance mechanisms where all actors, as we have seen again from the Premier's presentation, sit around the table. And we also need financing to back these mechanisms. This includes ensuring that all new investment decisions follow what we call a think resilience approach, so that we are able to avoid the creation of new risks with our own decisions and our own actions. The second pillar is around resilient infrastructure, and connected systems. These systems are the enablers to achieve all of the Sustainable Development Goals, to sustain progress, to drive economic growth, support resilience and recovery from disasters. The pandemic was a case in point on how a tiny pathogen, a biological hazard, triggered cascading impacts that brought supply chains to a standstill, shut down schools and businesses, and overwhelmed health systems. And we know that building resilience into infrastructure and systems is essential in order to survive the climate and all other disaster crises. The third pillar is that everybody must be protected from disasters and no one should be left behind. Building the resilience of communities and vulnerable groups requires understanding of their needs, engaging them, empowering them, and listening to their voices. This is the most effective way to reduce the disproportionate impact of climate change and all other disasters on these vulnerable groups. Excellencies, we must work relentlessly towards these goals. And I was very encouraged yesterday by the strong convergence I heard at the ministerial forum around our challenges, our progress, and proposals. Convergence is the basis of the necessary regional cooperation, and there was a strong expression of willingness to exchange and learn more from each other. Leaders stressed many things. The need for more investment in multi-hazard early warning systems and mechanisms for preparedness and response, resilient infrastructure, sharing of technology for solutions, making more combined use of science and traditional, local, and indigenous knowledge, compulsory education for disaster risk reduction and climate action, integration of disaster risk reduction and climate action, and enhanced access to disaster risk reduction financing. These were some of the many issues that came up over and over again, and we know that these are the challenges and solutions that we need to pursue. Excellencies, the countries and partners gathered here today have the power to take the steps that will secure a better future for billions of people and generations to come. National and local institutions, civil society, women and girls, children and youth, the private sector, academia, science and technology, indigenous people, persons living with disabilities, the media, and all stakeholders have a role to play together. And yesterday, again at the forum, we heard their voices loud and clear, and we will continue to listen to your voices throughout this conference. The United Nations attaches great importance to supporting the resilience-building efforts of all levels of our societies, from the community level to the local, national, regional, and global. We stand ready to work with all of you. In concluding, I would like to thank once again the Government of Australia, the State of Queensland, and the City of Brisbane for providing this wonderful opportunity to convene and learn from each other. And I thank you for all being here. Let us make the most of this opportunity to build a resilient and sustainable future for all and to fulfill the goals and targets of the Sendai Framework by 2030, so that in 2032, when Brisbane holds the Olympic Games, we have a very secure, safe, and wonderful environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mizutori. We're in for a real treat now. We're very fortunate to have with us today to perform for you the Australian Girls Choir, so please make them welcome to the stage.
where you'll find it. Will this place ever satisfy me? When troubles come and my heart burden be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up.
Please thank the Australian Girls Choir. And they will be back to perform a little later in the ceremony. They'll perform another song for us. Well, I now have the pleasure of welcoming our next speaker, Minister Watt. Minister Murray Watt is the Australian Minister for Emergency Management as well as Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. I don't know if you've got a voice to match those singers. I don't know if you'd be singing as a song. What an act to follow. But the Minister is from Queensland. And he has previously served in the Queensland State Parliament and since 2016 has been a Senator for Queensland in the federal government. We're grateful to have Minister Watt here to deliver the keynote address this morning. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much, Stan. It's always great to be on stage with you, and I can assure you and everyone here that I have no intention of singing. That's in all of your interests, I can assure you. Well, good morning, everyone, or given the international audience we have here, ohayo gozaimasu, bula to our Fijian friends, selamat pagi to our friends from Indonesia, and I'm afraid that's the limit of my knowledge of how to say good morning in all the languages that are here today. But welcome to all of you, wherever you're from. May I join with the other speakers today in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, the Turrbal, Jagera and Yagara people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As a government, we recognise that First Nations people have profound knowledge in managing their environment and reducing disaster risks. In Australia, we are fortunate to have a rich cultural history tied to the land and sea that dates back more than 60,000 years. And just as our government intends to establish a constitutional voice to Parliament for our First Nations people, we need to give voice to their traditional approaches to land use and management. May I also acknowledge the Premier, a very long-standing friend of mine and a fellow Brisbane resident. To Mummy Mizutori, it's been wonderful to get to know you and your team over the last few days. To the many ministers and distinguished guests who are in attendance with us. And may I join with the previous speakers in acknowledging the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, whose loss we mourn this week. As you know, she was not only the head of state for Australia, but also many other Commonwealth nations who are present here today. Ministers, heads of delegations and esteemed guests, welcome to the 2022 Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. I would like to echo the comments from the Premier and Ms Mizutori in welcoming you to Australia and particularly to my hometown of Brisbane. I want to thank the many staff from the UNDRR, from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and our own organisation at the National Emergency Management Agency for their hard work in organising this event after the many delays caused over the last couple of years through COVID. And thank you also to the Queensland Government and to Premier Palaszczuk for supporting the preparations and allowing us to host this event in our beautiful city. So as all of you who've been walking around this morning will have noticed, our city really is sparkling today. So it's hard to remember that only a few short months ago, this very city was swimming in water. In fact, the whole of southeast Queensland was drenched, in some parts experiencing record flooding. Right down the east coast of Australia, in fact, we saw the same thing, through northern New South Wales to lands west of Sydney and further south still. This was happening in regions that are well versed in floods. But even so, in those regions, record peaks were seen, causing immense destruction and leaving thousands homeless, and not for the first time. While inspecting flooded homes in Windsor, northwest of Sydney, I met a woman who was sloshing out of her inundated home. She told me, despairingly, that exactly the same thing had happened only a couple of months before. And right down the east coast of Australia in the last few months, I've met families, farmers, workers and business owners who've experienced 4 or even 5 floods in the last 3 years alone. In some cases, particularly in our southern states, directly after experiencing unprecedented bushfires that the whole world witnessed in horror. I'm sure that everyone in this room could tell very similar stories, whether it be about volcanic eruptions, storm surges, or rising sea levels in the Pacific, or earthquakes, typhoons, and catastrophic floods in Asia. Because no matter where we live in this most disaster-prone region, the impacts of climate change are here right now. We all come to this conference with a lived experience of disaster events that have tested our limits. And as other speakers have noticed, it's heartbreaking to see family homes and villages ruined, businesses destroyed, and tragically, lives lost. But if there is a silver lining from this, it is the strength of character we've all seen in individuals and an unshakable community spirit in coming together in recovery, helping one another to get back on their feet. And this spirit isn't unique to Australia, it's echoed across the region, the Asia-Pacific region, which, as we have noted, is the most disaster-prone in the world. This collective spirit to rebuild, to recover, and to become more resilient is inspiring to all of us, and it's central to the message that I want to convey here today. That while we may not be able to stop natural disasters from occurring in the future, by working together, we really can try to minimise the impact. We can and should ensure that we are disaster ready. But we must also take action right now to reduce the impacts of natural disasters. We all know that this region is facing more intense and more frequent natural disasters due to climate change. We must better prepare for these events, but we must also address the root cause, climate change. Unfortunately, for the past decade, in Australia, climate change has been used as a political football, weaponised to gain votes rather than to address real problems. And this has been to the detriment of communities facing floods, fires and cyclones. So I'm very pleased to tell you that our new Australian government, the Albanese government, is determined to change this. As a wealthy, developed country, we have a responsibility to change this. So that's why, since being elected in May this year, we have made real action on climate change one of our top priorities for our government. We have recently passed our landmark climate change bill, which enshrines a new target for Australia of 43% emissions reduction by 2030, and that's now law in Australia. We will now back up this target with further action through massive investment in renewable energy, by requiring large emitters to cut their pollution, and by sending a strong signal from Australia to the world that we are committed to ending the climate wars in our country and we are committed to taking serious action. Because there can be no doubt that the global climate does have a strong influence on the impact of natural disasters in Australia and in the Asia-Pacific region. And as many of you have reminded me over this conference, climate change is not an abstract threat, but an existential one. And the very real and escalating risk of climate change is being faced in our region right now through weather events that are too often being described as unprecedented. This conference is a time for us all to work together and further strengthen the disaster and climate resilience of communities right across our region. As Ms. Misatori has mentioned, the Sendai Framework is a global commitment to reduce mortality, morbidity and economic losses caused by natural, biological and technological hazards. Within Australia, the Sendai Framework is domestically implemented through our National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework. This framework establishes Australia's 2030 vision, where everyone is enabled and supported to actively reduce risks and limit the impacts of disasters on communities. The Australian Government is currently finalising our domestic mid-term review of the Sendai Framework, which will be submitted to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction by the 30th of September. Like many of you, our mid-term review demonstrates some real progress, but more importantly, it demonstrates that there is a lot more to be done. But I can assure you that we are committed to standing side by side with communities both in our own country and across our region, and to making concerted efforts to reduce disaster risk. In addition to reducing our emissions, the Albanese government is committed to ensuring that Australia is better prepared for natural disasters, and we are committed to lift our performance against the Sendai Framework. That's why, since being elected only a few months ago, we have acted quickly to implement a range of domestic measures that will help communities prepare for natural disasters. On the 1st of September, a couple of weeks ago, the Australian Government established a new national agency, the National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA for short, to provide start-to-finish oversight on emergency management, risk reduction, response, recovery and resilience in Australia. Further, the Australian Government is taking targeted action to reduce disaster risk in our own country in ways that align to the key themes of this conference. We are establishing a new Disaster Ready Fund, which will make up to $200 million available every year from the federal government for disaster mitigation and resilience initiatives. We are reviewing the financial support we provide to states through the jointly funded Commonwealth State Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements, with an intention to have initial reforms in place before this summer. And importantly, as I say, we are doing our part to act on climate change. Collectively, these initiatives support a more strategic and aligned approach across the whole continuum of disaster management. But it's not just about what we're doing here at home. Australia will continue to work with our international partners to pursue our shared objectives of building a resilient future for the whole region. And I was really struck during yesterday's ministerial forum about the number of times we heard very common themes being spoken to by different ministers from each of the countries represented here. And this shows that we do have shared problems, but we also have shared solutions. For Australia's part, we are pleased to host this Regional Disaster Risk Reduction Conference, and again, as has been noted, the first that includes the full participation of our friends in the Pacific. For our region to be successful, Australia and every country in our region must now step up. And that's why, on Sunday, I announced a range of funding commitments to help strengthen the whole region's resilience. This includes an additional $8 million from Australia to strengthen climate resilience in the Mekong. This funding will support nature-based solutions that protect freshwater ecosystems, promote sustainable livelihoods, and reinforce the capacities of local communities to better respond to climate change impacts and disaster risks. In our region, we are also responding to the call from Pacific leaders for greater Pacific preparedness. Australia is also providing $50 million to support disaster preparedness and resilience programs that work through Australian and NGOs in partnership with Pacific communities and local organisations. Communities best know their needs, so we must work more consistently with them. And we must make sure that those efforts are inclusive, engaging the full community and creating space for the excluded, the powerless and the marginalised, in particular women, children and people with a disability. As has been said, this is a core theme of this conference. No one must be left behind. Collective efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic response showed us what is possible when we work together at a national, regional and global scale. And Australia knows that partnerships are important, and that's why we're pleased to reaffirm our ongoing partnership with the UNDRR, and we will have more to say on this as the week goes on. Just to wrap up, as the host nation, Australia is proud to be able to showcase our domestic and regional efforts in disaster risk reduction. and I encourage you to visit the Australian host stand in the marketplace today to learn more and discuss further opportunities for collaboration. But I assure you that we will also be listening to you, learning from your experiences to adapt them to our own circumstances. That's what these kind of conferences are for, is learning from each other and applying them at our own homes. We do need to work together to develop a shared, inclusive vision of the future through strategic actions, effective investment pathways, institutional arrangements, and respectful partnerships. So I call on everyone here to be bold and ambitious with your vision and to take these next few days as an opportunity to learn, to connect and collaborate. I certainly owe it to those people who I've met in flood zones and bushfire zones, and I think we all owe it to those impacted by disasters in our own respective countries. Together, we really can transform our region's future with a global approach to disaster risk reduction for our peoples and for generations to come. Thank you and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Minister. If I could ask you just to stay on the stage, if I could call Ms. Mizzatori back to the stage as well. I'm now very pleased to bring back Ashley Roscoe, who earlier, of course, was part of that wonderful welcome to country from the Nunakul Yagara dancers. He will present a welcome from the Yagara peoples to be accepted by Minister Watt and Ms. Mizzatori on behalf of the Australian Government and United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction. Ashley?
Yira. Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ashley and it's my pleasure to be here today and present you guys with what we call a yalwabuna. And a yalwabuna is what we call a message stick. For those of you who might not know, a message stick is a tradition that's been going on for many, many thousands of years here. And a message stick, for those of you who might not know, is one of these. It's a piece of wood with little markings and carvings, sometimes paintings, which might depict a reason as to why someone might enter into your land. And it acted similar to a modern-day passport acts today. Now, back in the older days, with there being over 350 different Aboriginal countries or Aboriginal tribes, we all had our own set of customs, our own laws, our own traditions, and in most cases we even had our own languages, which is why we held such an emphasis on a welcome to country and various other different ceremonies such as smoking ceremony and the passing over of the message stick. Now back in the older days, if you were caught in someone else's land and you weren't welcomed in by that tribe and you didn't present them with a message stick, then there's a very, very good chance that you'll be speared right there on the spot. So I speak on all our behalfs when I say I'm glad they invented the telephone these days. But just on behalf of the Yagara people from around this area, we'd like to extend a warm welcome once again. And just say, we're all welcome to gather here on this country. And may God and all of our ancestors guide us in peace. I'd like to present this message stick here, and on this message stick we've painted a little bit of a message. And you can see that what we have on here is a big goanna. Now the goanna is like a big monitor lizard, and it's the totem of our people. All right, now the totem represents this country which we're on here today. The small white dots represent all of us here as a community coming together and meeting on the Yagara country. And the different markings, the yellow, white and black, will represent different natural disasters like floods and also wildfires. And it depicts us all coming together towards one common goal. So on behalf of the Yagara people, it's my pleasure to present this to you guys.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Minister Watt and Ms. Mizzatori. Well, earlier, of course, we had the great pleasure of a performance from the Australian Girls Choir. To conclude this welcome ceremony, let's welcome them back now to sing, very appropriately, Absolutely Everybody. Please thank again the Australian Girls Choir. Please thank also Minister Watt and Premier Palaszczuk, who we will farewell now. They have other things that they have to attend to, so please thank them today for their words. And Ms. Mizatori. Well, as I said earlier, the conference will consider ways that we can work together to reduce risks, save lives and minimise economic loss. We've heard this morning from the speeches about what has been described as climate carnage. I don't need to tell people in this room what the immediate impact of climate change is, because you are seeing this every day in your lives. Like the conference itself, we're going to discuss how efforts can be more inclusive to ensure that nobody's needs are overlooked. Now, this conference is an opportunity for all to attend, to network, to share expertise and insights. I encourage you to attend as many plenaries, working sessions, partner events and learning labs on the program as possible. I also encourage you to make new connections and reconnect with old ones. In doing so, we hope to identify concrete steps to truly transform the Asia-Pacific region's future. Please also take the time to enjoy the beautiful city of Brisbane, explore its charms and enjoy the famous hospitality and the gorgeous sunshine that we're seeing. At least today, there may be a bit of rain tomorrow, but a beautiful, beautiful day today. Again, welcome to all of you, and I wish you a successful, productive and enjoyable conference. I invite you now to our marketplace right next door. There'll be morning refreshments there. And I look forward to seeing you again in this room, 11 a.m. sharp, for our first plenary session. For our virtual delegates, please be sure to rejoin the broadcast at 11 a.m. Brisbane time. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.